girls of grade 5, and welcome to another English language lesson. I'm your teacher, Miss Melissa, and today we will be looking at a very exciting and important topic in English language. Today we want to take a look at subject and verb agreement. Are you familiar with this concept? Let me tell you, what is subject and verb agreement? Subject and verb agreement, or as it is called sometimes, concord, refers to the way that a word has a form appropriate to the number or gender of the noun or pronoun it relates to. Concord is the agreement, especially in number, between the subject and the verb of a sentence. Therefore, subjects and verbs must agree in number. This is the major rule that forms the background of subject and verb agreement. The subject of a sentence must agree with the verb. So how do we make the subject of a sentence agree with the verb? First off, we must be reminded that a sentence is made up of two parts, a subject and a predicate. And in the predicate, we will find a verb. So let me remind you, what then is the subject of a sentence? The subject of a sentence tells us what the sentence is about. It can either be a noun, for example, book, car, or even Mary. Or the subject may be a pronoun, for example, they, she, or it. In order to ensure that the subject and verb agree, we must first find the subject to see if it is singular or plural. So how do we find the subject? To find the subject of a sentence, you must ask who or what before the verb. For example, if our sentence is, the boy goes to bed early, and we would like to find the subject of that sentence, we can ask ourselves, who goes to bed early? What then would be your answer? Definitely the boy. So the boy is the subject of the sentence. Here we see that the noun boy is singular, and if it's singular, then it must take a singular verb. Also, if we have the boys go to bed early, we can ask ourselves, who goes to bed early? Our answer would simply be the boys. Here, the boys is plural and it's the subject of the sentence. For us to find an appropriate verb, it must also be plural. We said earlier that a sentence contains both a subject and a predicate. Within the predicate, we can find a verb. I'm sure you know that the verb represents the action of a sentence. For example, verbs might include went, is, are, takes, cooks, or talks. It must be noted, however, that verbs do not form their plurals by adding s or es, like nouns do. It is the opposite for verbs, since most verbs form their singulars by adding s and es. The plural form of most verbs do not end in s. So, let's look at some examples. Verbs in singular might include cooks, tells, goes, wishes, and suggests. From the examples, we can see that these verbs all end in s or es. What this means that these verbs are all singular, which means that they must take a singular noun also. Further, verbs in plural form might include do, take, guarantee, admit, or eat. As we can see here, even though these verb forms are plural, they do not end in S, and so they must take on plural subjects also. Therefore, boys and girls, to make a subject agree with a verb, we must follow 3 simple steps. First, we must identify the subject of the sentence. We can do this by asking ourselves who or what. Secondly, we must decide if that subject that we have identified is singular or plural. And lastly, we must decide which verb form will match that subject, whether it is singular or plural. So let's look at the rules related to subject and verb agreement. There are quite a few, but for the purposes of today's lesson, we will look at the first 5. Rule 1. A singular subject must take a singular verb. I'm sure you're familiar with this very basic rule. So I'll repeat. A singular subject takes a singular verb. So examples might include the baker makes pastries and cookies. First, let's identify our subject. Who makes pastries and cookies? Our answer would be the baker. The baker only refers to one person. Therefore, it is a singular subject. Our verb, therefore, should be makes, which ends in S and tells us that it is also a singular verb. So the singular subject, baker, takes the singular verb, makes. Let's look at another example. The dog growls at the stranger. We might ask, who growls at the stranger? The dog. Therefore, the dog is the subject of our sentence. Dog here is singular, and so the verb also must be singular. We have the word growls, ending in S, telling us that the verb also is singular. So the singular subject dog takes on the singular verb growls. So that is rule number 1. So let's move on to our second rule. The second rule states, a plural subject takes a plural verb. Now, let's look at these examples. We have, the teachers record their students' performance. Who records their students' performance? We can find our subject by answering the teachers. Here, we're seeing that teachers is plural, and therefore the rule tells us that our verb must also be plural. However, plural verbs do not end in S, and so the teachers record is grammatically correct. Further, the dogs eat the bones. To get the subject, we might ask ourselves, who eats the bones? Our answer would be the dogs. The dogs is a plural subject, and the rule tells us that a plural subject must take a plural verb. In that case, we must use eat instead of eats as the verb to go along with the subject dogs. So that there is our 2 basic rules. So let's move on to rule number 3. Rule number 3 states that the pronouns I and you take a plural verb in the present tense. Let's take a look at some examples. I advise them on a daily basis. We have the subject, which is the pronoun I. Our verb is advise, which is in its plural form since there is no S. Here we're seeing, as the rule states, that if we're using the pronoun I, we must also use a plural verb form. Another example might be, you are a very lucky girl. We are using the pronoun you. And their verb is are, which is plural, since the singular is. So, you, the pronoun, goes with a plural verb, are. Let's try to employ these rules in an exercise. Here, we will choose the correct form of the verbs in brackets to complete each sentence. Number 1. The crayons something placed on the table. But before we give our answer, let me remind you that Rule 1 states that a singular subject takes a singular verb. The second rule told us that a plural subject takes a plural verb. And our third rule said that if we're using the pronouns I and you, we must use a plural verb form. Remember also that our subject must agree with the verb. So let's take a look at the sentence once again. The crayons something placed on the table. Our words in brackets are was and were. However, let's first identify the subject so that we can choose the correct verb form. What was placed on the table? Yes, the crayons. So crayons is the subject of our sentence. Here we can see that crayons is a plural noun, and it would be best for us to choose were in order to agree with the subject. So the sentence would read, the crayons were placed on the table. Number 2, monkeys something trees. Our verbs are climb and climbs. But what then is the subject of this sentence? Definitely it is monkeys. Monkeys, as we are seeing, is a plural noun. Therefore, we must have a plural verb. What would you choose, boys and girls? Will you use the verb climb or climbs? Definitely, we would use climb, that is the one without the S, since climb is the plural verb form. So our sentence would read, monkeys climb trees. Let's go on. My brother something a blue wagon. Our verbs are drive and drives. But again, we must ask ourselves, what is the subject of this sentence? We can see that the subject of the sentence is my brother. My brother is a singular subject, and therefore it must take a singular verb. So we will choose drives, since we learned earlier on that the verbs ending in S are usually the ones in their singular form. So the sentence would read, my brother drives a blue wagon. I will give you 1 minute to complete the rest of this exercise on your own. you have 3 sentences. You something well. Write or writes. Next, 4 helicopters something the village in search of 2 bandits. Scan or scans. I something breakfast for the children. Prepare or prepares. 1 minute. You can get right into your exercise. So let's check in with those answers. At number 4, you should have you write well. We would choose write because the 3rd rule told us that if you're using I or you, we must use a plural verb. Number 5, 4 helicopters scan the village in search of 2 bandits. SCAN. Since our subject is plural, 4 helicopters must take on a plural verb form. And lastly, your answer should be, I prepare breakfast for the children, since I is used with a plural verb form. So boys and girls, your answers should all have been plural verbs to fill in the spaces. However, we have 2 more rules to go. So let's take a look at them. Rule number 4. It states that when 2 subjects, so in this case, we don't have Roy or the brother or the boys, but we have 2 subjects coming together and they are joined by the word and, we must use a plural verb. When a subject is joined by the word and, we call it a compound subject. Therefore, boys and girls, all compound subjects use a plural verb. So let's take a look at some examples. The cow and the horse are grazing in the field. Can you identify the compound subject in that sentence? That is, the 2 subjects that are joined by the word and? Yes, the answer is the cow and the horse. As you can see, we used a plural verb since our subject here was a compound subject. Next, the teacher and the pupils are both tired today. What is the compound subject in that sentence? Definitely, the teacher and the pupils. Here we're seeing 1 subject, the teacher, and another subject, pupils, being joined by the word and. Therefore, we had to make use of a plural verb, that is, are. So we say, the teacher and the pupils are both tired today. And lastly, if we have the roses and sunflowers sway in the wind, our subjects are roses and sunflowers. And we know that that is a compound subject. Therefore, our verb must be plural. and so we used sway. So boys and girls, here we must remember that when two subjects are joined by and, we use a plural verb. So let's try an exercise. We will choose the correct form of the verbs in brackets to complete each sentence. This exercise is based on Rule 4. So let's take a look at number 1. It states that my family and I something swimming in the beach. Boys and girls, what kind of subject are you seeing in this sentence and why? Definitely, we are seeing a compound subject because we have my family and we have the word I being joined together by the word and. The rule told us that we must use a plural verb. So, when making a choice from the verbs in brackets, that is, between was and were, we must choose the plural verb form. And so, my family and I would go with the verb were. So our sentence would read, my family and I were swimming in the beach. Number 2, Trevor and Jerry something to school together. Our choices are go and goes. Trevor and Jerry is a compound subject, and therefore we must use a plural verb. Will we choose go or goes? Definitely, we would choose go since go is the plural form of the verb. So our sentence would read, Trevor and Jerry go to school together. Number 3, Rajesh and Chin something a business. Manage or manages? Definitely, Rajesh and Chin is a compound subject, and therefore it would be best to take the plural verb form, which is manage. So, Rajesh and Chin manage a business would be the correct form of that sentence. Finally, something Marcia and Steve have siblings. Here, we are placing the verb form to the beginning of the sentence. But first, let's identify the subject. Here, again, we have a compound subject. Can you say what that compound subject is? Definitely, Marcia and Steve, two subjects being joined by and. Therefore, we must make use of a plural verb form. So, boys and girls, will you choose do or does? Remember, we are choosing the plural verb form. Yes, definitely do, because do is the plural form of that verb. So our sentence would read, do Marcia and Steve have any siblings? So let's move on to rule number 5. This rule deals with collective nouns. Do you remember what are collective nouns? Well, let me remind you. Collective nouns are those nouns that we use to give group names or collection of items. For example, a kit of tools. The collective noun is kit. Or a flock of birds. The collective noun is flock. Or even a pack of wolves. The collective noun is pack. So, here at rule number 5, it states, a collective noun, when singular in number, takes a singular verb. Let me repeat that. A collective noun, when singular in number, takes a singular verb. So therefore, that tells us, boys and girls, that collective nouns may either be singular or plural. And firstly, we are being told that if the collective noun is singular, then we use a singular verb. So let's take a look at some examples. Firstly, a flock of birds flies overhead. The collective noun in this sentence is, yes, flock. And as we can see, flock is the subject of the sentence. Flock is the main element of this collective noun. Do not focus on the noun birds, but focus on the collective noun flock. So boys and girls, for this sentence, we use the verb flies because the collective noun is a singular one. We have a flock of birds, which tells us of one flock. However, there could have been many flocks of birds, which might make use of a different rule. Let's look at another example. A bouquet of flowers was given to Mom for Mother's Day. The collective noun is a bouquet of flowers. Here, we're referring to one bouquet of flowers, and so the verb was correctly used. However, boys and girls, there's another element to this rule, and it says that if the collective noun is plural, then a plural verb form should be used. So we might see boxes of spoons. In this case, it is not just one box, but it is several boxes, and so we must use a plural verb. So a sentence might read, boxes of spoons are on the table. Additionally, many packs of cards were left carelessly on the table. The collective noun is packs of cards, but here the collective noun is plural, and so we must make use of a plural verb also. Therefore, many packs of cards were left carelessly on the table is grammatically correct according to the rules of subject and verb agreement. So let's try an exercise. We will choose the correct form of the verbs in brackets to complete each sentence. These sentences will be based on Rule 5. Number 1. A string of pearls, something used to make the necklace. We have the collective noun, a string of pearls. We are only referring to one string, and therefore this is a singular collective noun. The rule told us that if the collective noun is singular, then we must make use of a singular verb also. So boys and girls, a string of pearls was used to make the necklace would be the correct choice. Number 2, bands of musicians, something ready to perform at the charity event. The collective noun is bands of musicians. However, we can see here that bands is a plural collective noun, and so our verb must agree by being plural also. So, would you choose was or were? Definitely, boys and girls, because we are referring to a plural collective noun, we must make use of the verb were. So our sentence would read, bands of musicians were ready to perform at the charity event. Number 3. A host of angels something to the people in their dreams. We have to choose between appear and appears. Take a look at the collective noun. Is it singular or plural? If you said singular, then you are correct because it said a host. So that's telling us it's just one host. Therefore, we should use the verb appears because remember, verbs ending in S are actually singular. So the sentence would read, a host of angels appears to the people in their dreams. And lastly, bunches of grapes, something being placed on the table. Has or have. Let's take a look at our collective noun. Is it singular or plural? We're speaking of bunches, so that means it is more than one. Our verb therefore should be have. So our answer would be bunches of grapes have been placed on the table. You have been doing a fantastic job, boys and girls. But however, before we go, let's recap. Remember that subjects and verbs must agree in number. This is the main rule that forms the background of subject and verb agreement. Remember also that a sentence is made up of a subject and a verb, which must be in one accord when being used in a sentence. Also, our rules used today include 1. A singular subject takes a singular verb. Secondly, we said that a plural subject takes a plural verb. At rule number 3, we stated that the pronouns I and you take plural verbs. Also, we said that compound subjects, that is, subjects joined by the word and, make use of a plural verb. And finally, singular collective nouns take a singular verb, while plural collective nouns take a plural verb. So, boys and girls of grade 5, in this lesson, we were able to go through some of the rules related to subject and verb agreement. I hope you're excited for the lessons to come, where we will be exploring other rules related to subject and verb agreement. It is very important for you to study these rules since they are important for correct speech and writing patterns. Do ensure you check your English language textbooks for further practice exercises on rules done thus far. Until then, do continue to keep those brains active. At this time, I'll say goodbye for now until our next English lesson.